Yes, I'm ready. Yes, sir.
All right. Well, guess we're not going to, well, welcome to SharePoint User Group, or whatever this is called. I don't know if it's really that name anymore, I forgot. But that's what he's got up there, so I'll go with it. Thank you, Aaron, for taking this on, and we'll keep it short. Thanks, Microsoft, for helping us out with this and hosting. And thanks, everybody, for attending. And here's Aaron.
Hey, thank you, everybody. So let's start talking about SharePoint Framework at a glance. My goal today is just to give you a brief introduction of the tool chain and the multiple technologies related to SharePoint Framework, and actually go up and see some code and how can we start creating our own SharePoint Framework web part. So my goal for me to you is for you to be able to see what it takes to build the most simple type of web part inside of SharePoint Framework using the SharePoint Framework. As you know, my name is Aaron Gonzalez. I'm a solution consultant. I'm lucky enough to be an MVP 12 years in a row. And there's my Twitter handle and my email. So let's start. I want to start the session with a brief demonstration, a brief demo about Office 365 SharePoint Online. We live in a different world right now than we were. We all have a device with us. We all have expectations around technology and around how to use information inside of a company. And technology should be there for helping us make that thing more simple. Microsoft recognized this, and they have been evolving Office 365 SharePoint Online experiences to support what they call the modern experiences and basically make SharePoint a first citizen in the mobile world we live in right now. So let me just start with a brief demonstration here. Let me get my browser. Let's see. Where is it? Here it is. Okay. So I will navigate. I'm inside of Office 365. I noticed that I changed my resolution so you can see better the screen. This is a modern theme site, out of the box, using technologies that are beautiful and simple, that simplifies the user experience for people that need to consume information. This site, the San Diego SharePoint User Group site, is using some of the components that are out of the box. We have this news feature. We have this quick links features out of the box. When we add a new page, notice that instead of redirecting ourselves to another page or doing what we call a page refresh, it just loads another page. Very simple, very smooth. User can come and just type the name of the page and start having a great authoring experience, an experience that people today expect. Can you imagine a world in the future where we still have SharePoint 2010, 2013, and then we need to go and click Site Actions, Edit Page, and then have the web part pane on the side, and then click OK, and then do a refresh, and then get the page? That's too slow. That's too old. Today, people, users, generations expect something more dynamic, something more simple. So let's just start showing this simplicity and basically making the case why SharePoint Framework is important. And so let me start just talking about here. This is a sample page, very straightforward. Notice that there's no field there that I need to type information. It's very straightforward. As a user, even if I don't have experience with technology, I should be able to start poking and modifying the content here. It's simple for me to go and click this little thing here and then see a bunch of components that I can include in my page. Let's say that I want to include this other one here, which is text. And then I can start typing content. It has a very basic, what you see, what you get editor. But the experience is so simple, so smooth. You don't need to do refreshes. You don't need to edit the page and then go to the specific ribbon button and publish the page. Very straightforward. This is where we are right now. This is what our users are expecting for us to do. Let me show you something additional here. I can add another web part, and that can be something different from just typing text. We can include news headlines. Notice that automatically this web part is getting this news information from another source of data. We can include documents, and it automatically will be able to show us what document do we want to show in here. Maybe we want to upload it. Maybe we want to have it from another site. So the point here is it's very straightforward, very simple for me to get a document. How this is possible? So this is my question for you. How can we build something like this? How can be this so simple to use? So if I click open, notice that now I have my Word document inside of my page, save my page, and voila, I have a page, very simple, very clean, very dynamic, very different from what we had in the past. Okay, so how can we achieve something like this? How this functionality can come together and allow us to simplify our user experience? Going to the document library is the same thing. We have the modern document library. So we have documents, and as you may know already, you can just select a document and then pin the document to the top of the library, and then you have a kind of a preview of the document there, because this is a prominent document that makes sense for us to show in the first section of the page. So I ask you, how can we make something like this with the old model? How can we, in SharePoint 2010 or 2013, achieve something like this so dynamic, so simple? My point here, well, let me give you another example. Let's say that I want to create a field. I just click this plus signature here and just select the type of field that I want. Or maybe I can show and hide columns. Notice how simple, as an end user, I can move a column between the multiple ones and specify the order of the columns that I want. This is something new. This is an experience that has been built with a different model, with a model that runs on the client side and not on the server side. Remember, when you edit a page in SharePoint 2010, 2013, you modify the property pane of the web part, click OK, and then we do a refresh, and then the page comes back. That's kind of difficult. This is so different. This is so simple. This is so dynamic. Do you see my point? What I wanted to show first and talk to you about is that Microsoft is taking SharePoint to the new reality we are in. Oh, notice this other demo. So if I just make this smaller, my window, notice how the icons actually change, they hide. This is responsive by design. So it can be rendered on any device, on any size, out of the box. We don't have this in older versions of SharePoint. My point today is that based on the reality that we have right now, our development environment, our development approach, and the technologies available for us to accomplish experiences that are modern have changed. And that is actually the SharePoint framework, a new application model that runs on the client for creating experiences and simplifying experiences. Any questions so far? Okay. So let me go back to my PowerPoint slide. Oh, you know what? I need to return a little bit to my demo because this is very important. If I go back to my home page here or to the page that I just created and edit the page, every component that I add to my page, it also has the property pane that we know and that we love, that we use all the time. Notice that the actual component that I just added to the page, it has this little pencil here. If I click it, it will load a pane, a property pane that I can use to customize the behavior of this component. Let's see if I have another one here. For example, let's add a map, a bin map. The property pane for this particular web part, it's loading. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Notice this actual component allows me to modify, to specify information about the place where I am. What I want you to see is how dynamic the property pane is. If I click no here, the actual web part, it renders based on the settings that I provide. Let's see. My point is that the actual property panes are dynamic. You don't need to edit the property pane and then do a refresh to the page to get the web part going. You see what I'm saying? It's very straightforward, very clean, very, very nice for the end user. How can we accomplish something like this? How can we build solutions or experiences dynamic, that really flows, that really shines for the end user? And the answer is with the help of the SharePoint Framework. Microsoft is building a new long-term value-added services for enterprise mobility. You know, we all know that Microsoft is pushing hard for this new approach of mobile-first, cloud-first vision. So the SharePoint Extensibility principles are related to that too. Well, our principles are to provide an application development framework that allows to first and third party, so enterprise developers are able to build solutions, but also partners and third-party companies are able to build apps that we can consume in a whole ecosystem. Microsoft is trying to build an industry-leading client-side solution on-premise and on the cloud to build applications that are modern and more suitable to what we have today in our industry. And of course, Microsoft is pushing hard to unlock the potential of SharePoint and the Microsoft Graph on desktops and any device. So welcome to the new, I will say, development approach for this new era of client-side technologies and mobile-first and cloud-first vision. Have you wondered how other platforms and other companies build applications today? Well, they use pretty much open source tooling. Microsoft, it's embracing this approach too now. So we have new tools to build client-side solutions that are very familiar to other type of developers, basically to all developers in the world that are building applications, web front-end solutions. So we have now this concept of Node.js, Yeoman, Go, TypeScript, and Visual Studio Code as tools for us to build client-side solutions and be able to achieve experiences like the one that I was demoing. There are also frameworks like React, Angular, Knockout that simplify and allow us to build model view controller experiences, MVC experiences and simplify development and simplify support of development over the future. So this is what SharePoint Framework use for start building applications. So let's compare open source tools with the actual Microsoft stack. For example, Node.js, it will be like IIS and our .NET framework. NPM, it will be Node.js. So for those who use Visual Studio, we use Node.js to get templates and to get specific components from the web available in our IDE. So NPM is that for the open source world. Then we have Gulp, that will be that Microsoft built a option for us to automate tasks so we can build, compile, and deploy. Yeoman, it's a, it's like a template generator. So you can go and create your own project template in Yeoman and then reuse that project template in your development. In Visual Studio, for us, it's just saying file, new project, and then we pick and choose the template that we want to use. So Yeoman will be the equivalent part. And of course, the programming language, instead of C#, we use TypeScript, which is a superset of JavaScript that will allow us to compile JavaScript and generate JavaScript on the fly based on what we build with this language. So let's start talking about this specific components just in a brief discussion because I want to go and see it and show you a demo. Node.js is an open source cross-platform JavaScript runtime environment that developers can use to work locally and start building applications locally. We can also use Node as a server-side component that runs inside of servers. It's lightweight, it's very fast. It also has this Node Package Manager, the NPM, that I will explain later, and give us access to a large source of open source libraries in the world. So basically, Node.js is our hosting environment for building JavaScript solutions at runtime. Then we have NPM, which stands for Node Package Manager. With this tool, we are able to download specific pieces of software, of code, and integrate that code inside of our code base. It's similar to Node.js, which is something that we use in Visual Studio, such as a command line utility that allow us to install Node packages. It also do version management, dependency management, and simplify just us getting code from outside and doing it in a right way. Then we have Yeoman, the project template. As I said, Yeoman, it's a technology that allows us to create project templates. Basically, we can define the whole folder hierarchy and the multiple files that a folder hierarchy will have for a specific type of project. When you create a specific ASP.NET application, a Visual Basic application in Visual Studio, you just go and create file new project, and then you have a bunch of files that are your starting point for your project. Yeoman is the tool that allows us to create templates for our projects. Good thing is that Microsoft already created some Yeoman templates that we can use to build SharePoint web parts, and that's the one that you're looking at, Microsoft/Generator SharePoint. I will say that you don't need to be an expert on all these technologies, but at least you need to know to use specific features for now to start building our SharePoint Framework web parts. The Gulp piece of software, this is a very interesting tool, is a task runner that allows us to automate tasks, very similar to Microsoft build. So whenever we build a huge application, remember, in some point in time, we need to compile the application. We need to make sure that all the resources associated to the application are in the right location for us to process, compile, and package a particular piece of software. So Gulp is that in the open source world. And of course, TypeScript. TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript. Basically, it's when you start working with TypeScript, it's like working with JavaScript, but it has additional keywords and additional structures that allow us to generate JavaScript on the fly based on TypeScript. So it compiles to pure JavaScript. So in our demo, I will show you how some of the main components and sections of a TypeScript page or a TypeScript file, so you know what will happen. Allow enterprise developers to create better JavaScript because the JavaScript is type safe. Remember, type safe means that we know what data types are we using. Therefore, there's not a lot of confusion of the type of information and data that we are manipulating inside of our software. It introduced variable typing, classes, models, and things like that. And last but not least, the Office UI framework. This is a web front-end, I will say responsive, mobile-first experience that we can integrate into our project. It's a UI, basically. And you can use these UI components inside of our SharePoint Framework web parts to simplify and create the experiences that are very similar to SharePoint. By the way, the Office UI framework is the actual SharePoint UI. So if you want to create a web part that renders a list of data in a way that is similar to a document library, you will find in the Office UI framework all those CSS classes that will deliver an experience similar to SharePoint. Do you see what I'm saying? This is a web front-end solution to allow developers basically reuse the UI, the SharePoint UI experience. It has text boxes, it has people pickers, it has a bunch of components that we can integrate into our applications. So basically, in other words, we have a bunch of tools to start building these modern experiences. Then, when we build a SharePoint framework, we need to test that web part. So the SharePoint Workbench, it's another piece of our tool set that allow us to do local development time experience. So you can build your web part and test your web part locally without having SharePoint installed in your computer. And the test, you can test your changes immediately, even in offline mode. So I will show this. If you do a change in your code, that code will get compiled automatically, and the SharePoint Workbench will actually update based on the code that was compiled. You don't do it, it's just automatically. So you have a very good, nice experience for start building web parts locally without you installing a whole SharePoint farm to build applications. By the way, the SharePoint Workbench also works in Office 365 SharePoint Online, so you can also test not just your local web parts, but also your local web parts connecting to maybe Office 365 lists or Office 365 services like the Microsoft Graph. So much talking. Any questions so far? Okay. So let me talk to you about the development environment, what it takes for me to configure my computer and start basically putting all the pieces together for me to start building SharePoint Framework web parts. So what you need is download visualstudio.com, code visualstudio.com. Code, it's a lightweight Visual Studio code editor. Okay, you can download it and install it in your local computer. Can be a Windows 7, can be Windows 10, doesn't matter. Then you can download install the Node.js. Once you install Node.js in your local computer, then you can actually use some commands to provision inside of our local computer the Windows build tools, all these tools that are open source for us to compile and build SharePoint web parts. Notice in number 5 here, we have the code to get the Yeoman and the gulp pieces. And then we can also install our SharePoint framework, web part framework with what we call the template, the Yeoman template. So I recorded a video for you that will show the process of configuring your computer with SharePoint Framework toolchain. So notice in this video, I hope you can see it. It has all the process of provisioning the software inside of your computer so you can start building this type of applications, or at least exploring. So at this point, I'm downloading Visual Studio Code, and then I will proceed to install. It's very simple, right? So everybody can follow this procedure. But I wanted to make it in a video instead of me doing this because it will take more time for me to install Visual Studio Code, to install Node.js. It's simpler just to have a video and make it, and just cut the pieces that will take so much time, right? Any questions so far while we look at the video? Are we good?
I have a question. Are you going to have this session recorded someplace so we can go back and look at the notes, or is there?
Correct. I'm recording the session right now. So yes, the answer is yes.
Oh, that's great.
And I will upload the session to YouTube. So yeah. So notice here we install the Visual Studio Code. Now we are downloading Node. We will install Node. Very straightforward process. You will notice that you will feel that now you are working with a bunch of scripts and bunch of tools that are very familiar to what we used in the past, the command line tools. So it's at the first moment that you start using this technology, you feel like, what is this? Because notice I'm loading here PowerShell, and then I will run some commands that will provision the components that I need. And we are very used to work with Visual Studio, which with just 2 clicks we can get something done, right? At least we can start a project with 1 or 2 clicks. Now we need to type inside of a console window and then wait a little bit for the actual component to get downloaded from the web. But this is how it is. By the way, all these toolchain that I'm explaining, this is how other platforms build software today. This is how Facebook build their pages. This is how Twitter and other companies use to build modern experiences. So notice what is happening there. It's just using PowerShell, downloading a bunch of files, provisioning a bunch of things. By the way, notice that I also kind of translated in the closed caption thing there what we are going to do, so you can also follow the video. So now we are running the npm command to download the Yeoman and the gulp features required for us to build SharePoint Framework web parts. So it's very straightforward, okay? The add Yeoman generator, this is another component that will download the actual template for building SharePoint web parts, SharePoint Framework web parts. And this is it. Let's move on. The process of building SharePoint Framework web parts, the workflow, the flow that we follow is we need to first install the SharePoint generator. Then we use the Yeoman template to create a folder structure with the actually baseline code for a SharePoint Framework web part. Then we will start building our web part and testing our web part. We will use the gulp serve. This is a specific piece of software that will allow us to load the Workbench and actually test how our web part is doing. So we will follow this process of modifying the code. Gulp serve will compile inside of and then the Workbench will display our changes, and then we will test, and we will be there until we complete our development. If we are ready to ship, then we need to package our components, again, using this type of instructions, gulp package solutions, and then we will package and deploy our components. Unfortunately, today, I don't want to talk about deployment because it is a little bit interesting process that will require more time. For now, let's just start with the basics, and maybe in the future we can have another session just around deployment. Now, let's talk about how we can build our first SharePoint web port. First of all, you will need to use a command window, maybe PowerShell. Create a folder, open the folder, and then type Geo of Yeoman, Microsoft/SharePoint. What will happen is that this will provision a set of folders and structures inside of our computer. Before we do that, it will ask us what's the name of a web port, where the web port is going to get stored, what's the description, and as soon as we provision this information, it will actually create a folder hierarchy for us to with a code base already there for us to start enhancing our SharePoint web port. Then we use the code dot to open Visual Studio Code and start working with our SharePoint Framework code. The gold serve is the actual kind of a server that will compile our code. So I did record another video showing you all this process, but I prefer to do it by myself here. So let me see if you can see my screen. I have a virtual machine here. The process of creating a SharePoint Framework web port is very straightforward. Once we install this bunch of tools, we need to go to our PowerShell, run PowerShell as an administrator, and then we will use this command Geo of Yeoman, type Microsoft/SharePoint. And what will happen is it will ask us what's the name of our SharePoint web port, where the folder is going to exist. It has a bunch of questions, okay? So we will need to provide those questions. Let me show you how. So first of all, let me create a folder. So let's say it will be my first WP. And then I will navigate to the folder, and then I will use this Geo Microsoft/SharePoint. And it will ask us, what is this? What type of component we want? What JavaScript framework we need? So let's say that this is going to be Hello World.
Hey, Aaron.
Yeah, go ahead.
Did you go to the right folder?
I think so. Let's see. Yeah, I'm inside of my demo PF. Yes. Who is that?
It's just not the same folder you created, Aaron.
Oh, this is another one?
I think you created my first, but you went to my demo.
Oh, you are right. Thank you.
I don't know if that's going to mess you up or anything.
Of course it will. Okay. Yeah, you're right. Thank you. Thank you so much. You saved my life, man. My first web part. There it is. Oh. Okay. So I go to Geo Microsoft/SharePoint. Here we go. So it will ask us, what do we want? What do we need? What JavaScript framework are we going to use if we are going to use one? So let me go here. Okay, so this is going to be Hello World. And then where the files live inside of the current folder. When I start building this thing, I didn't know that I can use the arrows to move between these two things. So make sure you use this. Just select use the current folder. Then type your web part name, Hello World, and then a description of your web part. And then you can specify the type of framework, the JavaScript framework that you will use. Let's use React right now. And what will happen is this thing will provision a whole folder structure in my local computer that has the baseline for a SharePoint web part, a SharePoint Framework web part. It will take so much time to get this done. It depends, of course, in your speed of your internet connection, but it takes a lot, all right? So what I will do now is I will cancel this guy here, and I already have another PowerShell screen with this process completed, okay? So here, again, created a folder, provided this information, and then it just downloaded a bunch of files. Once we have this process done, Then we can start talking about code. Then we can start figuring out what we have here. Oh, what happened? Where is it? Here it is. So let me use this code called Visual Studio Code. So you will do this, code, period. And what will happen is it will load Visual Studio Code, and it will load the actual folder structure of your SharePoint web port. Okay? So what you see here is a bunch of code. If you are a true programmer, you will love this. You will feel like you are in love again, because this is a very interesting approach for building modern solutions. Very different from what we did in the past, because in Visual Studio, we just create file new project, and then we have maybe 40% of the project there, and then we start building the whole thing. Here, we will do everything. We will use existing APIs, existing classes, existing interfaces for us to build our web port. So this file, the .ts file, it's the actual TypeScript file that will have the code that will render content into my page, into my SharePoint web port page. So right now, what you see is very straightforward, but it is hard the first time you take a look at this. Notice that we have a bunch of imports sentences here that will actually bring JavaScript frameworks and functionality to our file. The most important one that I want to show you is this guy here, imports from Microsoft SharePoint web port base. This guy here, it has a bunch of classes, a bunch of functions that are related to web ports. So because we are building a SharePoint Framework web port, we need to have this guy here. Okay. So if you are a web developer and you like to build web applications, you will ask, where is my HTML? Where is my CSS code? So you will notice that we have a bunch of files, and inside of components, for example, we have this module CSS that represents the CSS of your actual web port. So you can come here and add the classes you want. When we build, for example, a SharePoint Framework web port, and we want to create a property pane for my web port, there's another section for us to build it. So in the actual TypeScript file, there's a whole property here called get property pane configuration. So with code, we will be able to actually create the multiple fields that we want to display in our property panes web port. Of course, if we are talking about having fields, that means that we need a data structure to store the data of those fields. So we use this other file called the web part properties to actually define the structure of our property pane. So for those who are .NET developers, do you remember what is an interface? So the interface is a way for us to describe an entity of data, to describe a very data structure, a simple data structure that then we can reuse between multiple codes and between multiple files. So yeah, I know that at a glance, this seems like a lot. But let me start showing you what's the real deal here. So let me go back to my console application, and what I will do is call the gulp serve. This will load a compiler, a software that will actually help us test our application. So it will take a little bit of time to run, but it actually creates our own, I will say our own IIS Express session for us to test our web part. So let's see. Any questions so far?
So Heron, this is Randy. So quick question. I love what I'm seeing so far. So you're doing all this work in a VM. For all of these different components that you're putting on here, so Node.js and Gulp and whatnot, how well will these work on a fairly lightweight, laptop or, a typical type of machine that people would have?
They work just fine. That's exactly my scenario right now. Well, no, because I have a virtual machine, but the actual host computer that I have, it's a very old computer and it actually works. It works very fine.
Okay, good. So those would say laptops would say, 8 gigs of RAM or so. This experience still works pretty well. And I know code is pretty lightweight as an IDE.
Correct. And yeah, and the most important point, Randy, is that you don't need to have your SharePoint farm for development. You just have this tool set for you to build what you want, which is
exactly
huge.
Right. Yeah, it's a huge benefit, right?
Correct. Yeah. So our Go serve command, it loaded this Internet Explorer or Edge. It runs under HTTPS, so it created a certificate on the fly. I will click continue here, and notice what we'll have. It looks so much as SharePoint, right? This is the SharePoint Workbench. This is the place that we will use to test our web part. Okay? So it's simple. We just click this icon here and notice what we have. My demo web part here. This is a demo for San Diego SharePoint user group meeting. So if I click this guy, it will actually drop an instance of my web part in my Workbench page. So I can test my development. As Randy said, this is huge. We don't need to have a SharePoint farm. We can do it right in our very local basic computer. We can do all this type of development. Okay? Now, I want to show you something else. So according to this web part infrastructure, this SharePoint Framework web part infrastructure, we have this concept of a edit web part. Remember that little arrow that you have in your page, and then you click edit web part, and then we do a refresh, and then it loads the property pane, and then you type whatever you want, and then click OK, and it refreshes again. That's old stuff. Here, I just click this pencil, and automatically loads the property pane without refreshing the page. Very, very dynamic. I also want you to see this. If I just start typing data, hello, San Diego. Notice that while I'm typing data here, it's actually modifying the web part live. This is huge from the end user experience because you don't need to do this refresh or rounds to the server and come back with HTML. No, it's just very dynamic. Then I can just click save my page, close this guy here, preview it, and then I have my web part with the actual content. I don't want to go too deep, but in reality this happens because there's kind of this model view controller approach for SharePoint web part that as soon as I type something here, all the constituent components that refer this particular value get updated automatically. It's very, very interesting. This is the next step for us as developers to learn and build and master. Now, let me show you how can we modify this property pane and what are the moving pieces that we need to change to kind of build something better, because this is just a hello world web part, right? So let me go back. Let me show you another concept here. Notice that my Go serve, it's running in the background inside of PowerShell. And then I have my Visual Studio Code. So let's say that what I want to do, I want to create 3 or 4 fields for my property pane window. So as I said, well, let's use this web part properties file to define the data structure of our property window. So let's do that. Let's just go and create some variables here for our web part. In this case, it will be, let's say, bio, a string. This is a string. And then let's add another one. Like this will be, is developer. This will be a Boolean, right? So notice that we can actually work with data types. Let's create another one. Love SP. Do you really love SP? Love SharePoint? This will be another, again, a string. And just to finish, let's do a checkbox. So the checkbox, it will be, again, a Boolean. Oh, I already have a checkbox there. So let's do receive emails. Receive emails. This will be a Boolean again. Straightforward. That's a data structure for me to start building my property pane. Maybe you will say, what? How can I go this deep just to create a property pane that in older versions of SharePoint is so simple to do? Well, the reality is because we have a lot of control. Let me show you why. And that control allow us to create significant experiences for our property panes, like the ones that I was demoing when I started this session. So let me go back to my actual web part code and let's start using this property pane. Let's start modifying the property pane. So as I said, this specific import section is critical because it has a bunch of features for SharePoint web parts, SharePoint Framework web parts. So it is importing classes, interfaces, and what I will do now, based on my web part, on my property pane structure, I want to capture a bio, like a description, a Boolean value, and a drop-down field and things like that. So what I will do, I will start using a bunch of classes that Microsoft already put together for us. For example, notice this, property pane checkbox. It's coming, here it is. So this is how development looks like inside of a SharePoint Framework web part. Let's do now a drop-down. So we will use property pane drop-down. So Microsoft already built all these classes for us to reuse. You will see in our property pane that these ones are very beautiful. Let's do a property pane toggle. Property pane toggle component here. And I think this is it for now. I will add another one that is very important, but this is not a control. This is another interface. It's called the web part context. Because we are building a SharePoint Framework web part, we need to know some information between the JavaScript code here and the actual page. So the web part context interface, it exposes some of the web parts behaviors and features in our TypeScript code, okay? Are we fine? Are you following me? Perfect. Now, let me go back to this method, the property pane configuration, and this is how we build a actually property pane just using code. So I will start using the actual functions that I imported into this method. So what I will do here, I will just type comma, and then I will say, no, wait. Let's see. Property pane bio. So I have this one here. So I will just type comma, and then use it. Property pane text field. My variable is called bio. So if you remember the data structure, it's bio. So this is the variable, and this is the actual label that I will display on this particular component, and the actual property that is going to be a multi-line value. So I can type more than just 250 characters. Let's try to do a checkbox. So I have another field here, property pane checkbox. So this is I call my variable is developer. Remember, it was a Boolean. So I'm saying, is this guy a developer? Are you a developer? Let's see, a developer. And then let's try to do another type of property pane field. This will be a drop-down field. It's called the love SP. Let's see. Yeah, love SP. It's a string. So notice the label is, do you love SharePoint? And then you have the actual options of your drop-down. So we have, yes, I'm a super fan. No, I'm not too fan. I just want to die, right? So, and then the last one, which is a toggle button. This is a property pane toggle called receive emails. And it says, do you want to receive emails? And it has two states, on and off, and that's it. Okay? Are we good? So notice what I will do right now. This is powerful for developers because in the past, we needed to compile the solution and then test. When I click File, Save All, the goal automatically we precompile our components. It will analyze the code that I created, and it will deploy in the SharePoint Workbench my new version of my web part. Okay, so you don't need to, you know, in the past, you don't need to click play in Visual Studio to run the application. It does it automatically, because that's what Go does. It compiles at runtime and deploys at runtime. So let's see what happened here with our web part. I don't know if it's done. Let's see. It's supposed to refresh automatically. Let me refresh it by myself. Do you think it's going to work? If I click edit, notice my property pane here. It has a description field. It has a multi-line text box field that I can use. It has a checkbox, and then it has a drop-down and a toggle button. So it's very, you will say, well, this is so much code, but as a developer, as a programmer, you will start feeling a little bit of passion for this because you have a bunch of control now of what type of experiences you want to create for your end users. End users are supposed to use and to use technology that is simple. So this is the actual infrastructure, technical infrastructure for us to build simple experiences. Now, notice that if I change this description field, it modified the text here, right? So let's do the code to actually modify the other fields that I just created in my property pane and display those in my web part. All right? So it's not as straightforward, but it's, you can imagine, it will require some code. If you are a developer, you know that the word render means something to you, right? Render, it means something. It means that if you were an ASP.NET developer, that this is the actual method that will translate the actual components and classes into HTML. By default, SharePoint Framework Web Part already has a implementation of the render method that will display what you just saw. But as a developer, you can do whatever you want. You can use this .element inner HTML function. Let me show you here. I'm sorry, property, to actually define what will be the HTML that will be rendered to the client. Okay, so straightforward. Now, notice that if you analyze this HTML, you will see that we have that class, and then it's kind of loading the actual class name dynamically, right? Because it's using this square brackets here, and it's using this $sign. This is a kind of a nomenclature that automatically will bring the value on the fly. But it is referring something called styles. Basically, it's referring the CSS styles, the ones that I already talked to you, this style here, the module CSS. So I have a question for you. How can I bring the CSS styles into my page, into my web part framework code? Anybody? How do you think we can get additional functionality from another file inside of my SharePoint Framework web part file? Any hint? Okay. We will use the imports, the import keyword, to get from another file inside of my code a resource, a style, or whatever I need. So I will name this guy here styles, and then I will use the actual path of my file. So if you remember, it's inside of components, and then inside of components, we have my first web part thing here. It's called my demo WPFX, that module .cscc, and then we use this. So now notice what happened. Now we have this kind of strong type component inside of my HTML that I can use to call the multiple CSS classes that are stored in that other file. You see? This is very interesting because you have a lot of control. So we have these classes here. Now, remember that I created this property here to describe the data structure of our property pane. So notice we have this other property called a TIS_properties function. So I'm sorry, it's not a function. So we can actually refer to our existing code. So let's type here description, and then here properties bio is developer love SP, and then we have receive email and the button. Straightforward. So I just modified the render of my SharePoint Framework web port. I bind my code to other files to actually get their values, in this case the CSS, and I'm good to go. So if I click File, Save All, Gulp will compile all these changes that I just did, and it will deploy again all my components. So let's do this, save all, and see what happened. Notice in the background, it's doing his work. It may take a little bit. Yeah, it's doing it. Then I will refresh here my SharePoint Workbench page. And notice what happened. If I click my edit web part, and then I type data here, notice what is happening right now. It is just actually modifying the content inside of my web part. If I click, are you a developer? That's a true. If you click, do you love SharePoint? Yes, I'm super fan. And yeah, I want to receive emails. Basically, we are creating our own property pane and modifying and building our web part the way we need, the way we want. Very dynamic, very simple experience, very simple to use. Users will love not to have the hassle of modifying property panes that refresh the page and things like that. And by the way, because we are using some CSS here is responsive by default, and we have a lot of other perks that come with the SharePoint Framework model. So this is a SharePoint Framework web part. This session is it's recorded, so you will be able to follow this exact same example for you to start getting a feeling on what it takes to build something like this. Any question?
Comment, and not so much a question. This is Randy again. So thanks for what you're showing us. I kind of just want to point out that this does look different. It does look difficult on the surface. But you kind of have to remember, it was not easy learning SharePoint development either. I mean, you know, the example here and you've given with, you know, just creating, you know, the web part properties panel, that was pretty doggone hard in SharePoint. You know, I did lots of web parts that way, and I never liked it either. And then think of all the packaging work you had to do, getting them in the WSP, recycling app pools, having to wait. I guess if there is a question, you know, thinking about, Aaron, you know, what we used to do versus what you're seeing now in SharePoint Framework, compare the learning curve, compare the speed at which you can produce new code.
I will say that you have more power because you have a lot of control of what do you want to build. So if you want to use existing JavaScript functions, existing JavaScript frameworks, and actually predefine very compelling JavaScript code and web front-end code, you can do it here. So there is no limit. So I will say that from the development perspective, if you are a programmer, if you are a developer, you will love it because you will get, again, this relationship with code that it was similar when you were at college, right? When you start developing, so you will like it if you were a true developer. And there's a bunch of features, a bunch of plugins, things that we can reuse and build now. So you can actually be very productive and provide a lot of power and impact to whatever you're building because there is no limit to JavaScript and HTML and CSS.
Okay, and if you were to compare the learning curves from what it used to be like having to learn SharePoint Dev, you know, back in the day to what you're seeing now, would you say it's similar? Would you say this is easier? Is it a little bit harder? What are your thoughts on that?
I think this is going to be, it's not going to be easy learning TypeScript or learning this HTML5 and CSS, but it's going to be an investment that will help you a lot of years, that you can see and use these skills beyond just next version of SharePoint. This is a standard, right? This is technology that is open source. This is technology that is going to be available for a while. So it's not just use C# or using a specific object model that exists by Microsoft. It's you learning a fundamental stack of technologies that make the internet possible. So that's good for your career too.
Cool, good stuff, thanks.
Okay, so in summary here, I just, in this PowerPoint slide, I decided to include this key topics inside of, to build the property pane. Inside of the function that builds the property pane, you will reuse the functions that you imported and define the type of control that you want. For example, for text boxes, we use the property pane text field. For checkboxes, you will use the property pane checkbox, and you name it. There are like 40 different controls there already. And then once you do that, remember you need to import the actual functions inside of our TypeScript file. Then you need to define the data structure of your property pane. And then if you want to predefine the values of the data structure, you can use the manifest.json file to predefine what will be the values for each specific data type described in my data in my interface. And then the most powerful method here is the render method that will allow us to actually define what will be the HTML that is going to get returned by this SharePoint Framework web part. Using the imports keyword, you can get the styles, you can get some other constructs inside of the SharePoint Framework that you can reuse in your HTML in kind of a binding way. Like you just type the dot and it will load the actual name. And it's very simple to develop like this. Yes, who is this? Okay, so I guess I will leave here two slides. One is the resources slides with a bunch of hyperlinks here. And then I will leave another one of Office 365 pattern and practices team with a bunch of information around SharePoint Framework, a bunch of examples, videos, content for you to learn how to build this new type of experiences using predefined technologies with Microsoft. So this is it. This is what I prepared for you. I did it so quicker because I want to make sure that we cover all the topics here. Any question?
Yeah, Aaron, this is Phil.
Yeah, go ahead.
Great presentation. So after last meeting, when you guys talked about it, I actually went ahead and tried out the Hello World demo that they have online. And so a couple of things. One is that the SharePoint framework, as I understand, everything runs in the user's context. So I guess they were saying that if you need to elevate that access to, I don't know, for permissioning reasons or whatever, you would not be able to do it just in the framework. You might have to do some kind of hybrid model with the add-in model of development. Have you looked into that at all, or?
Yes, yeah. So it is important for everybody to understand that the SharePoint framework is another approach for us to build client-side applications. All the stuff that we use in the past, WSPs, server-side code, info platforms, all the things are still there. So the add-in model is still there. SharePoint Framework web part's still there. The WSP file's still there. We need to figure it out. What piece of solution will be the one that help us deliver what we need? So SharePoint Framework web part, it's client-side rendering. That will mean if I need to make sure that my development renders properly on a device, I will say SharePoint Framework web parts, it's the approach to go. Okay? But if I need to build other type of applications that requires maybe connections between multiple web parts inside of a page, or I need, in this case, store data outside of the actual site in a website, or isolate the functionality and encapsulate in an add-in, well, then we use another model. So yes, you're right. There are limitations of SharePoint Framework because it's the approach or the actual reason why we use this technology is for specific business scenarios, for specific solutions that we want to deliver. So the next topic for us to figure it out is what technology and approach is the best for our requirement. If I need to actually do impersonation and kind of run something in the context of another user, maybe the SharePoint Framework web part model is not the one because it only runs under the user context, right? But remember, currently there are other options. There are something called webhooks and other alternatives available in Office 365 that can actually allow us to perform additional things. Our job is to understand the multiple approaches available to figure it out what will be the best approach for the business scenario that we have. So yeah, right now SharePoint Framework runs under the context. If you have a scenario that you need to run in an impersonated mode, then we need to figure it out what will be the best approach for us to use to deliver that particular requirement or that particular behavior. It make sense?
Yes, yeah. So the second observation I went through the demo was that in order to test connecting framework to a list or a library other than a pretend one, like the mock library, required that I set up a Office tenant.
Correct.
So while you showed the Workbench on the local side, I'm sure you can do a lot, but if you wanted to, I wasn't clear. I didn't think you could create a SharePoint list in the local Workbench, but they let you connect to a SharePoint tenant. So I signed up for the 30-day trial, and from there, you know, to continue the second part of the demo to produce or to show all the lists available in the tenant, you know, all the default lists.
Yes, that is totally correct. The Workbench is just a page inside of Internet Explorer, and we use it to actually build whatever we want. It seems like SharePoint, but in reality, it's not SharePoint, right? SharePoint is inside of Office 365 SharePoint Online. So the Workbench that I show you locally here, it also exists in SharePoint Online. So you can, number one, yes, request a developer tenant, then create a site collection that will be your actual site for development. Use the Workbench there and test your code to query lists and query things that exist in SharePoint Online. Right now, for example, with the example that I did, it's very straightforward, very simple. But if I needed to actually query a list, I will not use the Workbench locally. I should use the Workbench in Office 365 so I can actually query lists that exist inside of my SharePoint Online site. So it's a mix between using your local Workbench, but also using the Workbench that is hosting Office 365 for you to test multiple scenarios, queries, data, etc.
Yeah, I just have to find the information that said I could request to extend the 30-day trial.
Sure. Well, what I do in those cases, I create a new one, a new trial. But yeah, maybe, I don't know what we could do there.
But yeah, it was very cool technology, very few hiccups through the demo. And then I was able to create a practice list and actually read the items. That's where it got a little more challenging. But yeah, very cutting edge. And I would say, like you said earlier, definitely it's good to know JavaScript.
Definitely.
That helps a lot. So, yeah, learning the basics of JavaScript are, I think, key, along with obviously CSS and HTML. But thank you very much for the demo.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Now, the goal today was just to show what it takes to build the most simple web part, so you can decide if you want to invest in learning this technology. Now, I have this slide here. If you want to become a SharePoint Framework master, well, this is what you need to learn. Conceptual processes, JavaScript embed models, use technologies like web stack tooling, Node.js, things like that. But thank you.
Yeah, JavaScript, HTML.
Yeah, it's amazing. Angular, React, all those JavaScript frameworks, they provide a lot of value for you to build forms, to build applications, to build very dynamic web client solutions. And it is hard. I do say that it's hard learning all this stuff, but this is going to be pervasive, and this is going to be something that will be valuable not today and in the future, definitely. It's coming together. People are building applications all the time, and this using and building these applications using standards and open source, it's a way for us to actually maintain our skills in a way that that will be maintained over time. I will say that lynda.com, that recently was acquired by LinkedIn, it also has a bunch of videos around these technologies, very well defined, very well training material. Pluralsight.com, it's another site that you can use to kind of learn this technology, JavaScript, Angular, and this type of frameworks. But right now we have all these video platforms, training platforms for us to get involved and understand a little bit more of these technologies instead of us doing from scratch. Any other question, guys? By the way,
Sounds like
SharePoint Framework is coming to on-premise too, so it's something that you can leverage in the future.
good to know. Thanks for pointing that out.
It's coming.
It sounds like you covered it pretty well. We really appreciate it. It was a really good session and informative. I think all the discussions and questions before and during made for a good evening. There's quality material here. Do we have anything else? Sal, you have anything you want to raise?
You guys should see the invite soon, but I'm setting up another Office 365 event. It's going to be in the Los Angeles office though this time. It's going to be on introduction to Microsoft Groups and Teams. So you'll be seeing that soon on Meetup. And then after that, probably another session on the Office 365 groups down here in San Diego at some point. You'll be notified of that. But thanks again, Ron. It was really good. I learned a lot.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time. And any question, anything in the future, you know my Twitter handle, you know my email. Happy to help. Happy to learn together. So thank you so much, everybody.
Great. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Hopefully, we'll see you next month or up in LA, or let us know how you think this doing it virtual is as well. We may want to do that more often.
Yeah, I kind of liked it how, it'd have been interesting, even if Harold would have been here, to broadcast it at the same time. Maybe we'll get a broader audience, but anyway, we'll look into that.
All right, if there's nothing else, I guess we can wrap it up. Thanks again, Heron. We really appreciate it. It's an awesome event. Catch you next time.
See ya. See you, everybody. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Time for a beer.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.